guys, welcome to my yoga and movement-based Q&A. So a couple days ago I asked some of the guys who follow me on Instagram if they had any specific questions around yoga and movement for me. So yeah, without further ado, here they are. Question from Millie. She asked, how did you make the transition from practicing with a prompt or instructor to practicing on your own terms? So my experience is perhaps a little bit more unconventional. I actually started without a teacher and without prompts for about 3 years. And then that long into my practice, I then went to a couple of classes and had a teacher instructing me there. So it was a little bit different in terms of the approach I took, perhaps to like a bunch of other teachers. But I would say, and like my goal with all my private students at least, is to be able to give them enough of a solid foundation and understanding of the movement practice so that eventually they can go away and practice by themselves because they have the setup. But in terms of tips, I would say if you feel comfortable enough, exploring the movement, the practice by yourself, just like set yourself up one day, play some good music, set your room up, have some like candles going, and just start to explore. Start in a basic position like down dog and experiment how you can make a sequence on one side and perhaps do it on the other as well. So yeah, the main thing is just explore and have fun. Alice asked, how do you get over the fear of doing moves like headstands and handstands? So I think with everything, the more you practice it, the easier it's going to become, the less fearful you will be. But obviously, to get to that stage, you have to get over or at least work through that initial fear, because it is terrifying, like being upside down, balancing on your head or even your hands. So when you do start practicing it, if you do have someone around that can spot you and that can help you, that can be super beneficial to the practice and sort of mitigating the fear. But also make sure you try have soft objects around, like maybe some pillows, so that if you do land, it's not going to be super heavy. If you've just started practicing out, a wall can be really beneficial to use as well, because okay, if I do go up, my now chance of falling down is now a little bit more restricted to side and back down to my feet. So that can be beneficial, but just try with the wall to not become overly dependent on it, because that can stifle your progression. But yeah, it is one of those things. It's a lot of physical feats that you have to get over, but also mental. So it's just training different elements of your brain. The book I just read asked how to improve strength in my arms. So a couple different ways you can do it. Obviously, it's dependent now on the equipment that you have around you, but one super simple way to do it is body weight training. So making sure, again, you do start to stack joints, like in plank positions or anything like that. If it's available to you, maybe have weights. Do things like overhead press, bent over rows. If you don't have weights, resistant bands are a good alternative as well. But the main way that you can improve strength in the upper body is through strength training, usually with a barbell or heavier weights. Basically, you're trying to get stronger than your actual body weight. You're increasing and progressively overloading your body to develop that strength even more so. So just to put it into perspective, before I started strength training, I couldn't really do a pull-up. I just didn't have the muscular awareness of how to do it. But since doing more strength training, particularly working on my bench press, I've now been able to do pull-ups because of this muscular awareness in my body, how to recruit certain muscles and activate them, and it sort of translates there into the pull-up movement. But I've also seen so many different benefits when it comes to me practicing things like handstands, forearm stands, and arm balances. So yeah, it's a whole round beneficial thing to do. Next question is from Irina. She asks, what's the best way to start doing any movement for the first time ever in my life? Cool, so take it slowly. It's obviously quite overwhelming if you haven't really moved and trained before to decide what you want to do or how to even go about it, because there's so many different things. You could do running, you could swim, you could climb, you could do yoga, it doesn't matter what it is. So perhaps experiment, try a bunch of different things that are currently available to you in this climate, obviously with COVID, considering. Just experiment, see what really sparks your physical fire and the challenge, as well as a mental aspects, what you get pure enjoyment and thrill out of. That's how I keep finding different things to do as well. It's not just restricting myself to one particular movement, it's a bunch of different things as well that I find enjoyment from. So yeah, start slow, take it easy, do different things or a bunch of different things on YouTube if you can. So Grace, or that Ginger Yogi, asked, how do I correctly put a crystal into my sacral chakra? If you're wanting to put a crystal in there, that's a wrong thing to be doing. I don't really know too much about the chakras or crystals, but yeah, I mean, if you want to put one up there, go for it. Kegels. Evelyn asked, any tips on staying body positive and mentally healthy? So things that have helped me recently, within like the past sort of like year or so, are just understanding more that, especially as a woman, like your body is constantly going through changes, particularly at different times of your cycle. There are stages where you hold more water, where you feel a little bit more bloated, where your brain is telling you certain things as well. So just trying to really hone in on how I'm feeling at certain like phases of my cycle has been really beneficial. And it's like, okay, I know this is happening around this time, and being a little bit more mindful of that and not letting it almost like determine and govern the next few days, and knowing that it will pass, as things like, you know, sometimes will, hopefully. The other thing that's also been really beneficial to me is just moving more for just enjoyment rather than out of punishment. That was like my mindset for a very, very long time. And as soon as I started to remove that, I removed this idea of expectancy and judgment. And it's just allowed me to find movements that make me feel good, whether that is like strength training, whether that is doing yoga, whether it is being upside down, it doesn't matter. I'm now doing it for me rather than for some external validation that I might get from like a stranger. Another thing as well, because like this is such a multifaceted question, is eating things that make you feel good. And like my relationship, my history with food is quite complex. So right now I feel comfortable and like I can enjoy all the food that I want to again and not have like any real restrictions. I feel like with restrictions, they can really stifle like the longevity and sustainability of your eating habits. So it's just like finding the enjoyment through that as well. Another thing, sorry, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent, is like just sitting down with yourself, you know, for maybe 5-10 minutes in the day, doesn't matter what time. Not necessarily meditating, but perhaps just listening to your breath and just being quiet and seeing what's coming in and what's coming out, and just trying to understand your current emotions, your current thought processes at the time. Because again, then it's like a little bit easier to tackle things throughout the day, especially if you're like constantly going over the same sort of repetitive thought patterns in your head. It can be really like distracting when you're just trying to get on with normal tasks. So sitting and observing what's going on to sort of understand it a little bit more and not just dig yourself deeper into a hole. Another thing I have done is put clothes away that don't make me feel comfortable or don't make me feel good. Not necessarily like chuck them away, just like don't worry about wearing them, because again, like to me, if I'm in clothes that make me feel good and feel comfortable, then I know like whether it's placebo or not, I just feel inherently a little bit better and like more comfortable in my skin. Yeah, I think those are just some things. But also like just to let loose every now and then, I don't know, every now and then I just play music really loudly and just dance around and really don't care, and that just makes me feel good in my body and feel a little bit more connected to myself. So yeah, hope that helps. Okay, so Sylvia just put a really good like phrase in, so just radical like self-acceptance and just being like completely and unapologetically you, like basically just not giving a shit what other people think. And that's something that I've tried to really hone in on recently, and just be me because I want to be me, not because I think I need to fit into certain boxes that other people have created for me, whether through the stereotype of being a yoga teacher or a female or whatever it may be. So yeah, just being me and being happy about that. Kate Rose asked, when is the best time in the day for yoga? Again, like traditionally, especially like Ashtanga yoga practitioners, they would practice as the sun rose for 6 days a week and then have the 7th day off. in this day and age, obviously it's a little bit different, particularly in the Western society. Again, you look back at these Ashtangi yogis, and that was all they did. Yoga was essentially their life. So they had that opportunity to rise with the sun and practice with the sun as well. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. I personally used to really love practicing in the morning when I woke up because I felt like it set me up for the day. But now I feel a little bit better when I start to move in the afternoon time, like 2-3 o'clock. I think it's like getting over that like midday kind of slump. Plus I'm just hibernating and staying in bed more these days. But it's honestly up to you. If you feel good in the morning, go for it. Feel good midday, feel better in the evening, it doesn't matter. It's just whenever the practice is there for you at the end of the day, so you make it what it is, and just don't force something because you've heard it's supposedly better in the morning, because that can again just be like one person's experience of it. Leah Kirsten asked, how do you deal with super sore muscles, gentle movements, or rather complete rest of that area? So talking about DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, which can happen from movement, a new movement, or movement that is like maybe a little bit harder than before. So again, with DOMS, it's important to recognize the difference between muscular soreness and muscular pain. So if there is pain, try and rest. Don't just like stretch for the sake of it, because that's not going to do anything beneficial for you. When your muscles are sore, I would say perhaps, gentle stretching does and can help it a little bit. But what is perhaps a little bit more beneficial is things like foam rolling. So foam rolling on your thighs or your hamstrings, or even into like the areas of like your serratus anterior, maybe a little bit off the thoracic spine, not too much of the lumbar spine, can be helpful. Maybe even getting like a tennis ball or a harder lacrosse ball and like rolling it through other parts of the body, maybe like forearms, super gently across the chest. These are all ways just to help like the fascia again sort of like release and open up and not get super knotted. But the other thing as well is drink a lot of water. You need to hydrate, you need to keep like the blood flow going to the muscles, you need to keep everything in like working condition. Also, rest is super important. In order to aid recovery, you need to make sure that you have adequate amounts of sleep in order to like help the process of getting over your DOMS, having good nutrition as well. So it's not just as simple as foam roll, stretch. It's like everything else that comes into it as well. So it's your nutrition and your supplements, your sleep on top of everything else. So just making sure you attack it from like a whole holistic perspective and not just through this one like focal point. Question from Steph. What's your current movement routine, i.e. strength training, yoga, etc., and goals? Cool. So I currently strength train twice a week because I feel like 3 times a week for me, it gets a little bit overwhelming to fit into like my schedule, and I don't really want that pressure. So I do strength training twice a week, and it's a mixture of pull-ups, bench press, deadlifts, and squats, plus like a bunch of accessory movements to kind of complement working on those key lifts. Also recently, I would be climbing once a week, but like bouldering centers are closed, which sucks. So we're finding more enjoyment from parkour at the moment, which has been really fun, a different kind of mental challenge for me for sure, as well as physical. I'm really enjoying that actually. Trying at the moment to do it once a week, but the weather's like really shit right now and really wet, so it's making it hard. But just having like different exposure to that movement is pretty fun. But on the days that I'm not lifting, I do either practice just like a yoga flow or a mobility practice or animal flow, or just crawling around on the ground, sliding on my floor, just having a bit of fun, doing some handstands or whatever. I'm not super serious about like my physical practice anymore in terms of like, I really want to achieve like this depth in like a certain back bend. That's not how my practice is. I mainly do things that will supplement the longevity of my body. That's why I do strength training alongside the mobility work. But I think in terms of goals, with yoga at least, I really want to be able to do like a straddle press into handstand. So I can do, presses are basically where you kind of like just float up into a handstand without like kicking up. So I can do one called puppy press, which is where one leg is still on the ground, the other's like kind of cocked up in the air, and you float the other leg up. Straddle press is essentially like you have your legs like split and then they come up together, and then pike press is together and they come up. Sorry, that was a really bad demonstration. But anyway, my goal is to get these presses because they're super difficult to work towards. But I know that it'll be really satisfying when I do. So I'd like to work and get that goal. In terms of strength training goals, I'm pretty happy with like my current 1 rep maxes on like bench press, squats and deadlifts. Probably my current goal with them, sorry, speaker just died. Current goal with like pull-ups is to be able to do 5 unassisted pull-ups in a row. So yeah, thanks for asking and being interested. So there's a bunch of questions that are very similar, so I'm just going to kind of like lump them together. So firstly, Kai asked, how do you manage to stay motivated to continue practicing yoga? Joanna asked, how do I motivate myself to start yoga? And Lara asked, tips on getting into a consistent self-practice routine. So I'm going to start with Kai's question. I'm motivated to like continue my practice because it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about and that I do love. And it's not only like such a huge part of my life, but it's also part of my business. So in a lot of ways, it's just like intertwined into who I am and my current lifestyle. But also I know that if I do go for a few days without practicing yoga, not just the movement aspect, the other aspects of it as well, I really start to notice the differences. So like my body is just generally more sore and a little bit more pain and more stiff, but also like mentally my brain is just like everywhere. It's really, really chaotic. And I just don't have it in me to just sort of like calm everything down. So I obviously know like the benefits that the practice has over me because I've been doing it 7 years now, so yeah. Okay, so for Joanna's question, how do I motivate myself to start yoga? I would say be curious about it. First of all, try go in with just like this really playful kind of attitude, nothing like too serious, nothing like, oh, I need to feel this particular way because I've done yoga, I'm going to feel so much more chill. Like, no, just go in with it like, you know, like you're a child again. You want to just have fun and experience a different thing, move your body in a different kind of way, and just get experimental with it. And that kind of leads me on to Lara's question, which was tips to get into a consistent self-practice routine. So Sylvia and I were just talking about this. She said that a good way to almost establish a good relationship with something like this is to have almost like a little dopamine boost afterwards. So say to yourself, okay, I'm going to practice for like half an hour in the morning, and then after I'm going to go have like this really nice tea that I like. And it's almost like that little like pleasure reward center. You're getting the endorphins from moving, but then there's this association with like a little bit of a dopamine boost. Or whatever it is, will be like, okay, 30 minutes of practice, and then I'm going to have like this little treat, this little bit of chocolate, or I'm going to do whatever makes you feel good, basically. And through that association, it makes you want to do it even more and more. And that's a way to sort of like improve that self-motivation. Because it is really difficult, I totally understand that. But yeah, this is another little way just to like help it a little bit more. FitFab5Fish, great name, says, I have a mobility issue with hips and was wondering if yoga can be of benefit adapted to different abilities. Yes, so obviously like a couple different things. I'm not physio number one, so I can't give you like a full complete answer. I have my understanding of movement and the body, but also it's really hard to know your specific requirements because I haven't met you in person or I haven't done like any kind of like an assessment. But for the general population, yes, yoga can be beneficial just because it's providing like movement. Movement at the end of the day is better than doing nothing at all. But if you really want to work on improving your hip mobility in particular, you would have to look at doing things like maybe even working with a coach one-to-one who specializes in mobility and maybe even strength training as well, because it's no point in just having really flexible or like mobile joints. You need to have like strength around them as well. But of course, yeah, with everything, movement can be adapted to suit your needs a little bit more. It's just maybe working with someone to figure that out a little bit more rather than just going in on it blind. Yeah, hope that helps. Question from Kathy. Tips for Warrior 1, how to work on squaring hips forward with the foot placement. Okay, so this is what it looks like, Warrior 1. You've got to look at this from the base up. You always have to look at your foundations and then travel up to the area that you're questioning. So right now you're looking at the hip placement. You want to have both hips facing forwards. That requires the back leg to have quite a lot of ankle mobility, number one, but also calf and hamstring flexibility, number two, and also just to have the core awareness to keep both hips facing forwards, as well as pelvic stability, glute activation. So there's a load of different things going on to initially even get those hips facing forwards with a back foot flat. Now, it's one of those things, unfortunately, that can be down to genetics. It could be down to your pre-existing levels of movement and flexibility or whatever it is. And also you've got to ask yourself, like, why do you want the foot flat on the floor if your hips aren't facing forwards? It's going to be so much better to keep those hips facing forwards and the back foot lifted off the floor a little bit, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter hugely whether or not you accomplish these specific like points in the pose, as long as you are doing it safely for your body and you're not making, you know, movements that are detrimental to you. So again, what works for the teacher is going to work totally differently for you and the students next to you and around you. So it's worth just bearing that in mind and trying to take more of a whole rounded view of the practice. Again, not just like a pinpoint, like it must look like this because that's the only correct way to do it. That's not. There we go. Final question from Emma. I always struggle with a good or proper chaturanga, but I've tried a few ways, but my elbow always clicks. Okay, so this is what chaturanga looks like full chaturanga. So this is quite a difficult move anyway. It requires quite a lot of bodily coordination, muscular activation, joint awareness, blah, blah, blah. I would say try to like break down the pose, but also know that by just repetitively trying to practice chaturanga, you're not going to get it. You need to do other movements as well that will complement it. So a lot of our yoga practice is very like push based. You need to do things that are very pull based movements. So coming back to strength training, doing things like pull-ups, doing things like bent over rows, doing things like seated rows or T-bar rows or lat pull downs. These are all different examples of how you can start to train the muscles in the upper back to strengthen and bring your shoulders more into neutral, so that when you go into chaturanga, your shoulders don't collapse inwards, they stay into neutral alignment, and then when you press down, the body is in a stronger and more stable position. And then you might find from there that the elbows don't click. Again, clicking doesn't always indicate that it's a bad thing. Sometimes it does, but again, it's very like context and individually like dependent. But maybe your elbow clicks because there's lack of stability in your shoulders, because they might be coming forwards into internal rotation when you lower the body down. So by strength training and drawing the shoulder back into neutral, when you start to lower down, there'll be more control, so you might not feel that click in the elbow. So it's just worth, again, understanding that by just practicing and trying to drill out as many chaturangas as possible isn't the way to do it. You need to introduce some other movement as well. But yeah, hope that helps. So yeah, thank you for listening, guys, and dropping in your questions to me. I hope these were beneficial and helped you understand your practice and your movements a little bit better. If you wanted more videos like this in the future, obviously let me know, comment below, and I will see you next time.